What's going on, guys? Haven't done a pickups video in a long time, so I figured today would be the perfect day to do it because stuff is kind of stacking up, and I figured why not? It's been a while since I've done something like this, mix things up a little bit, and we'll go through some stuff that I've grabbed the last several months. So geez, what should we start with? What magical thing should we start with? I guess let's start with video games. And I've been on a Genesis kick lately. Now, I am by no means picking up the amount of stuff I used to in probably the last like 3-4 years, just because prices for stuff have been insane. But anytime I do hit a place for whatever reason, or if I see a place in my travels, I do try to stop. And if the price is right, if the price is cheap, I'll pick stuff up. And I've been trying to pick up a decent amount of Genesis and Master System stuff because in my game library, what's probably lacking the most is Genesis stuff, just because growing up I was a Nintendo kid. Played a lot of NES, played a lot of Super NES, and even though I was stupidly a part of that console war, you know, Super NES is better than Genesis, Genesis is better than Super NES, I always appreciated Genesis games, especially stuff like Castlevania Bloodlines or Contra Hardcore. And that's just a very, very small list of some great Genesis games that are out there. So getting back into playing these games over the last, I don't know, 17, 18 years, I've slowly been playing more Genesis stuff, and just recently I've been just trying to pick up more stuff Genesis, mostly complete in box, or at least boxed in the first place. Doesn't necessarily have to have the manual, but because these boxes were so sturdy, it's very hard that I've, in my travels anyway, that they don't come with instructions. I've been very lucky in that aspect. So let's talk about some of the games I picked up. Capcom's Super Street Fighter 2. Get a nice zoom in of that baby. Very much a Super Nintendo fan of this game. It was the version I played first, obviously, other than playing the actual CPS2 hardware in the arcades back in the 90s. And I heard a lot of people say that this is the better version, and I don't quite agree. I think the Super Nintendo version just looks a lot better, and the other thing is the music and the sound, the voice samples for this are absolutely terrible, distorted, just very, very low-level samples, and they don't sound too great. Is it a bad version of the game? Absolutely not. It's very playable. You can get through the game from start to finish. It has all the moves. Is it the superior version of it? No, but if you're stuck in a only Genesis environment, then there's nothing wrong with picking this up. Glad I got it. I'll just put you down here. Next up we have Pac-Man 2, the New Adventures of Pac-Man. And if I believe I'm correct, I have this on the Super NES, but this was like 99 cents. And I think this is the different version. Actually, I'm looking at the back of this here, and I'm correct. This isn't your straight-up action platformer. You kind of point and tell Pac-Man where to go. And this is a couple people's very favorite version of Pac-Man. And one of these days, I'll sit down and play it. It was cheap, so I decided to pick it up. Going to the Master System, we have the Hang-On and Safari Hunt combo. I have been on a Hang-On and Super Hang-On kick lately. I love the music to the game. I have the vinyl record of it, and I don't know, I just really, really, really enjoy it. So when I saw this, I had to pick it up. Hard Driving. This is a Tengen game from the Atari folks, and the first time I've played this was actually at the Underground Retrocade in Dundee, Illinois, and there's something about this game that's just really neat. It's basically Stunt Race FX without the crazy characters, the crazy race car characters. And the arcade version of this is huge. You get into the cockpit and you drive, and it runs pretty decently. When I saw this for the Genesis, I was actually pretty shocked that they put this out, and was curious to see how it performed, and it actually performs pretty decently. It's probably like 10-15 frames a second, but most of the stuff that was in the arcade version is here from what I can tell. I'm not very good at it, though I did get further in this than I did the arcade version, and it looks like it doesn't have the instant replays of the arcade version, but it must have been just me who didn't get the instant replays during my playthrough, because it says there's an instant replay over accident just like the arcade hit. So apparently it's all there, folks. Outrun 2019, this is one that I wasn't very familiar with. I have played it once or twice, and I thought it was very, very different from the original Outrun formula, but again, this was a cheap one. I decided to pick it up. I mentioned I was on a Super Hang-On kick. There you go, that's the Genesis version of Super Hang-On. Pretty decent port, and actually has some additional modes that the arcade version doesn't have, where you can actually pick up parts for your motorcycle, challenge people. Pretty cool. Mortal Kombat 3. I'm not much of a Mortal Kombat guy, but again, this was cheap. I think this was like $2. I had to go pick it up. I have always been very underwhelmed by the Mortal Kombat series as a whole, and the first time I played Mortal Kombat 3 was most definitely on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And I thought it was okay on the Super NES, and maybe it's just my memory, but playing the Genesis version of this, it seems faster than the Super Nintendo version. Yeah, the color isn't as good, but the sound effects are pretty awesome, and I don't know, it just seems faster. So to me, this is probably the best version to play. One of these days, I'll have to go back to the Super Nintendo version and check that out. Where else should we go here? So along with a couple of these games that I've already talked about and some of the stuff I have in my hand, I recently made a trip over to Chicago to go see the Midnight at Lincoln Hall last Thursday. And before we made our way over there, we decided that we were going to stop at People Play Games, which if you're from the Chicago area or you're very in tune with what's around with retro video games, they recently announced that they're closing. I think they're only going to be open until April 14th. I guess they're going to turn the building into an apartment complex or something like that. So hearing that, I wanted to make sure that I got out there and at least checked it out, because I've never been there. Unfortunately, we found out, and I had to reread the Facebook post, that at this point they're only open on Thursdays, Fridays, and I think Saturdays and Sundays. Or I'm sorry, they're only open Fridays and Saturdays. And that was extremely disappointing, because, you know, we got there and we looked in and it looked like the place still had a ton of stuff, but nobody was there. And they only had a sign up that said they were closed Mondays and Tuesdays. So they're probably losing a lot of business for their closing days. Maybe they don't care, maybe they're mad, but unfortunately, never got a chance to stop in the store. And at this point, I never will, unfortunately. But we weren't completely out of luck, because we were able to go right down the street with my buddy Nikos and go to the Exchange, which had a ton of great stuff. A lot of the stuff that I just showed you actually for great prices, and some of these here are those games I picked up. Cool store, great variety of stuff for video games. The prices were pretty decent, and tons of music, tons of Blu-rays, tons of DVDs, really helpful staff. Makes me miss Disc Replay in Hoffman Estates, another one that's closed up, unfortunately. I think the only one around me now is in Rockford. But as far as the other games I picked up, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops on the PSP, and unfortunately, I didn't look at this when I opened it up. It is actually Portable Ops Plus, which I think lacks the storyline stuff, which is unfortunate. My fault for not looking at it. It was a couple bucks, so I'm not going to bother trying to return it. Final Fantasy Dissidia, which I really enjoyed on the PSP, but never had an actual copy of it. Pretty cool. Pretty fun. Kind of Final Fantasy beat 'em up featuring multiple characters. And this one I actually did not get at the Exchange. I got this from my local GameStop that's been selling some retro stuff off and on. This is Street Fighter the movie. I have this on Saturn, but not on the PlayStation. Price was right, so I picked it up. Back from stuff at the Exchange, I picked up both the Headhunter games, Headhunter and Headhunter Redemption, which I found out I already had a copy of, unfortunately, so I'll probably throw that on the eBay, or if someone's looking for it, I'll probably give it to them. And wow, that's kind of the majority of game pickups I've done. So why don't we jump to something else? Why don't we jump to, let's talk controllers, because there are a bunch of controllers I picked up, and I did pick up one at the exchange. I picked up this dual link controller. This is for your Genesis, your Mac, as well as your PC. This is from Retrobit. My experience with Retrobit controllers, hit or miss, mostly hit actually. I've had a lot of good luck with the Retrobit controllers. I've oddly been able to avoid all the turds in their lineup. I saw this Street Fighter Genesis controller there. This was brand new in the box, 15 bucks, and I decided to give it a try, see if it's decent, and see how it works on the Genesis. I'm happy to report that it was actually pretty responsive. I played a few different games on there, some platformers. I played Super Street Fighter 2 with this. The video I'm displaying what I'm talking about, Super Street Fighter 2, that was played with this control pad. Really didn't have any issues with the D-pad. The buttons were responsive, and I did hard driving, Shaq Fu, and a couple other games with it, and honestly no real complaints. I'm not sure if it'll last in the long haul. I won't say it feels cheap, but I just don't know about the durability of the product. But for 15 bucks for a pretty decent 6-button Genesis pad that also works for your PC, not too bad of a deal. What controller do we want to talk next? I don't have the controller with me because it is in my Switch bag, but I did pick up one of these 8BitDo SN30 Pro Bluetooth controllers. This is actually my replacement of this controller. Wanted to get this because on my Switch I was playing Master Blaster Zero, and I had the original 8BitDo Bluetooth SNES version, and it works with the Switch, but because it's missing buttons, you couldn't assign all the buttons in the game, and I ended up having to do a lot of switching in the settings version anytime I was using that controller. So when they announced this controller, I definitely wanted to pick it up. I had a pre-order in for Amazon, and I received it, popped it open, charged it, and I absolutely love the thing. Both thumbsticks are very responsive. It has rumble. The control pad feels great in your hands. Really no complaints about it. Make sure you update the firmware on it if you get it, because that makes a huge difference. Anytime I get an 8BitDo controller, I instantly update the firmware. A lot of the complaints I see about those controllers, a lot of people find out that they're on older firmware, they update it, and then they're good to go. So that's my recommendation on that. My issue with this controller, and I said that this is my second controller because I had to get it replaced, was plugging it into USB chargers. This is USB 3, and is it USB 3 or is it USB-C? I always say that. USB-C, let's correct myself there. I plugged in the USB-C cable to a turbocharged port on my work computer, and the light turned on for a second and turned off, and I was like, that's weird, what's going on? So I'm going back and forth with it, trying to get it to work, and finally I'm looking at the controller and I smell the charge port, and it actually fried the charging port on the controller. So the controller was useless, and I ended up having to play my whatever I was playing that day, I'm not sure, my Switch game with just the regular Joy-Con controller. It's not the end of the world, but compared to this, I really like this, so it was kind of a bummer. Returned it to Amazon. Amazon sent me another one, updated the firmware. I'm good with it, but if you pick this up, just be careful what you're plugging into when you're using a charger with this thing, because it will burn out if you're not careful. But I do recommend it. I do like it. And now I have another controller for Switch when I do multiplayer with people. It's kind of a crack up. People see me and a couple friends in the back of the car because I got my Switch screen now mounted in the back, on the back seat, and we can just play. Pretty cool. Next up, sticking with controllers. This is, and man, you're not going to be able to see this because the packaging is so cheap and dark, but this is the 8BitDo Retro Set Play Your Original Systems Wirelessly. This is the latest version of the Super Nintendo controller, a wireless Bluetooth Super Nintendo controller that 8BitDo has released. They've changed it. I guess there was some kind of issue with like lawsuit because it looked too similar to the original Super Nintendo version. I don't know if that's the case or not. Doesn't matter. But if you're unfamiliar with this, this will pretty much link up to anything that has Bluetooth, your PC, your Mac. And with this, these 8BitDo retro receivers, you can actually plug this into your Super Nintendo, or if you get the NES attachment or the SNES Classic or NES Classic adapter, you can use it on these systems. Now, I pretty much use these extensively up in my game room as well as in my family room when I'm playing games, and they've been very responsive for me. Again, update the firmware on them if you want the best experience. Now, when they announced the second batch of the controllers in conjunction with the release of the Super Analog NT, I started following reviews, and reviews were not good for it. And I was wondering why, because the reviews for the original controller were actually pretty decent. So what changed? Did they change the pad? Did they change the buttons? Why was everyone complaining? And they said they were receiving lag and other issues. So I finally took the plunge. I decided to get it because I wanted a second version. And I began testing it to see if I really had any issues with it. And I will say that I ran into one issue with the controller itself, and that was with Castlevania Dracula X. I don't know if it's because the pad is very tight towards the diagonals, but Richter would repeatedly kind of go into a left to crouch to up to the right position. And that could be very frustrating in later parts of the game, especially if you're fighting Dracula at the end of it, because you're in these pillars and one false move will lead you to your death. I had a couple instances where the controller really screwed me over, but then I played other games and didn't have an issue. No issues with Street Fighter, no issues with Super Castlevania 4, Super Metroid, the list goes on and on. I've played a lot of different games with this controller and have never really had any issues with lag. So I know it doesn't have the best of reviews on Amazon and other places, but I like it. It functions with me, and it's really great having wireless in these environments where you need two players and you may not be close to your console. Especially in the basement when I have my Super Nintendo or my analog Super NT connected to the projector, it's nice not having to worry about the wires. Just my opinion, and again, if you get these, the wireless receiver and the controller all have separate firmware updates. Get the latest and greatest firmware. But I do dig it. I dig these a lot, and if you're looking for a solid wireless controller, I would recommend checking it out. Get it from Amazon. If it doesn't work, return it. What do we want to talk about next? We're kind of switching up here. Well, let's talk a little Neo Geo. And a lot of people are going to get heated up about this one. I decided to pick up a Neo Geo X. And I picked it up because the price was right. It was super cheap. The screen has a few blemishes on it, but nothing really too bad. This thing got a lot of flack when it came out. There were a lot of pre-orders for it, and I think it was pretty expensive. I want to say it was like maybe 100 bucks, 150 bucks. I don't quite remember, but it was announced in 2013, and the internet pretty much spontaneously shit on the thing. Screen didn't look good. It was stuck in like a 16:9 mode, not a true 4:3 mode. The game emulation wasn't the best. A lot of complaints. So I decided to stand away from it, not pick it up. I didn't feel it was worth the money. I already had an AES. I already actually have a Neo Geo MVS cabinet, and I also have a Neo Geo CD. So did I really have a need for it in the first place? Not really. Do I have a need for it now? No, but again, it was cheap. But because it was cheap, I picked it up. Everything was pretty much included with it. It didn't have the dock or any of that stuff, but apparently all that looks like shit, so I didn't care. I have played the thing for a couple hours, and honestly, I don't have many complaints. When I did some reading, though, I do see that there's a firmware update for it that made it run better, and maybe that version that I'm playing here has it, but I don't have many complaints. I may use this as my work handheld if I need to pull something out. I don't have my Switch bag with me. I just want to play something. It's not too bad. Charges up. Got some decent games on there. I mean, not the greatest selection of Neo Geo games, but I don't think it's too bad. And doing some other research on this thing, I found that you can actually completely hack it and put in a custom memory card, but you have to like lightly glue some of the pins. I don't know. I won't get into details, but overall, I think it's a pretty damn solid system, especially for the price I paid for it. Are there better options out there, especially now? Hell yeah, but for what I paid for it, which was like, I think less than 50 bucks, I don't know. I think it's worth it. So I have a slew of other pickups, but I want to really just talk about this guy right here. This is the last thing I'll talk about for this video, and that is the SD2SNES flash card. I've been through a ton of flash cards for the Super Nintendo, folks. I started with the SNES Power Pack, loved that thing, went to the Super EverDrive for more of the saving capabilities, thought that thing was okay, and then finally, after getting the analog Super NT and having my other Super NES systems, I decided, you know what, it's time to jump up to the god tier of flash carts in terms of Super NES and get the SD2SNES, and I gotta say, it's worth it. If you are on the fence between the Power Pack, the Super EverDrive, or the SD2SNES, get the SD2SNES. I honestly wish I would have skipped the Super EverDrive and got the SD2SNES. The Super EverDrive works, but man, does the SD2SNES blow it away. For multiple reasons. The compatibility is much better. The load time for games is instant. No sitting and waiting. The stuff just loads. I've really had no compatibility issues with anything, especially after updating to the recent firmware that was available. And the MSU1 audio games that you can get and download are well worth checking out. It really makes the game brand new. I know that sounds stupid because the playability is the same, but the fact that you can play these games with CD quality audio now just adds a new dimension to them. I've done Super Castlevania 4, Dracula X, F-Zero, the list goes on, and these hacked ROMs with the CD audio is just incredible. Just today, I saw that a few more MSU1 hacks have come out, and that was Killer Instinct and Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. Let's talk about Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct is a favorite fighting game of mine. I'll never forget getting the opportunity to rent the game a few days early because our local video store had it in, and getting a copy of that Killer Cut CD that came along with it. I love that CD so much that when the vinyl edition came out, I picked it up. So the fact that there is now an MSU1 hack that has that Killer Cuts and arcade audio featured in the game is amazing. And firing it up and playing it just really breathes new life into the SNES version of the game. Now it still looks like someone went into the low resolution mode on the arcade game somehow, and you're playing just a low grade level of the arcade version, but it's still fun, still performs pretty decent, and with the actual arcade and full music from Killer Cuts on there, it's just fantastic. Here's a clip from the game with how it sounds with the MSU1 audio on an original Super Nintendo. Check it out. Pretty awesome, right? And there is a ton of stuff out there, a ton of different games that you can check out with the MSU1 hacks. Now I will say that not everyone has the audio levels really fixed for that. Some stuff is louder than the other tracks, which is a little distracting at first, but it's getting better. Very cool. Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. We got to talk about that really fast before I go, because I do not like Ninja Gaiden Trilogy. Poor port, doesn't play spectacularly as well as the NES versions, and the music took a dive, and for me the music is a very huge part of the series. The MSU1 releases that came out today or a couple days ago is fantastic. Really breathes just, again, new life into these games and makes me actually want to play the trilogy version of Ninja Gaiden. In fact, I think I'm going to go through and play 1 and 2 tonight and see how quickly I can do it. But here is a clip of some of the different levels from Ninja Gaiden 2 as well as the title screen, so you can check this out for yourself. Pretty awesome. I'm going to leave you guys with that, and hopefully you enjoyed this pickup video. I had a bunch of other pickups I wanted to talk about, but really I think we were getting too long in the tooth here. So if you want to see another pickups video with what I have left, mention it in the comments below and I will do so. Thanks for watching and enjoy some of this sexy, sexy audio.